Good evening, members. If everybody could take their seat, please. Right. Welcome to the Policy and Resources Committee meeting of the 26th of October 2016. Before we get to the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting the fire alarm to sound tonight. So if it does, please remain seated and Mrs. Matthews will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place, and I don't see anybody indicating. And at this point, can I just stop and ask our visitors, can you hear me properly? Thank you. Because it's a new system, and I just wanted to make sure that I'm projecting accurately. Thank you very much. Item Agenda 1. Are there any apologies for absence, Mrs. Matthews?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillors Harwood, Powell and Round.
Thank you. Sorry. I am, yes. Item 2, notification of substitute members. We have Councillor Ring.
Substituting for Councillor Round.
And Councillor English.
Substituting for Councillor Harwood.
Agenda item 3 is urgent items. I do not believe there are any urgent items tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, but before we go on, I believe that every councillor on this committee has received a letter from the Kent Association of Local Councils. I certainly had it today, and I believe there was a copy going to everybody else. I will just confirm with Mr. Green, but I believe you've not seen it. Right, it's regarding the precept that it was the precept, wasn't it? Yes, regarding the precept, and it's a request regarding what will happen in the next budget round that we're discussing. So what I'm really trying to say to everybody is that this did come in today, but I do not believe it was an urgent item that we needed to discuss. I believe Mr. Green agrees with me. It can be included as part of the normal round of budget discussions. Mr. English.
I don't believe it's been circulated to substitute members of this committee. It certainly hasn't gone to me. So given that when it is discussed there is a possibility that some of those substitute members might be here, can I ask that it is circulated to all of those people?
We'll ensure that's done. So we'll get it out to you, well, hopefully tomorrow, because it's not that difficult to actually forward that to everybody. Agenda item 4, notification of visiting members. Councillor Newton.
Councillor Newton speaking on item 12. Thank you.
Agenda item 5. Are there any disclosures by... Sorry? I beg your pardon. I thought you were coming in a different capacity. Sit down, please. Okay.
I'm Councillor Bill. Oh, we're there. I'm Vice Chair.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Because
yes,
you are who I thought you were. We have you and the lady there, I believe, actually coming to give a statement before one of
on
the
item
items.
12, yes.
So you're not a visitor as such.
Oh, I see.
Or,
sorry.
No,
I
that's
apologise. Thank you.
And Councillor Burton, I'm sorry, you were lurking behind Councillor Borton's rather nice frame.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I thought my hair might have been tall enough to be seen. Councillor Matt Burton, just observing tonight, thank you.
The gentleman who's just arrived, did you wish to speak tonight? Thank you. Right. Are there any disclosures of lobbying from anybody? Oh, have I perhaps? I'll come back to you. It's all right. Okay. Let's get the lobbying and I'll backtrack. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No, I don't see any. And item 5, which I jumped over, disclosures by members and officers. Councillor Harper.
Agenda item number 14 about Fant Wildlife Site. As I'm a trustee of the Fant Wildlife, so I'll leave the meeting at that point for that item.
Thank you. No, right. Agenda item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. There are no yellow pages, so is that agreed, members? Thank you. And now we turn to the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of September. If I go through for accuracy, first of all, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Councillor McLaughlin?
Bullet point 4 from the bottom. I think it should say we should look at balance sheets, not bank sheets.
Correct. Do the members agree that we should make that amendment? Thank you for spotting it. Page 6. Page 6. Oh, sorry. All right, page 5. Councillor Bryce.
I thought after the questioning from Councillor Borton on the night that we'd established it was an informal message that had been received rather than a formal message. So I just wondered if that could be clarified. Sorry, do forgive me. Sorry, bullet point 1.
For the benefit of everybody, could you read it out and suggest what amendment you're proposing?
That there was an informal message from East and West Kent.
Mrs. Matt, I'll come to Councillor Blackmore first.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 6, are we on page 6? Oh.
Mrs. Matthews, would you like to say what is in your notes for the evening?
My notes did clearly say that there was a clear message.
Members, I think we need a show of hands then. Those that remember it as a clear message, would you please show? And those that remembered it otherwise? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think then we leave the wording as it currently is. Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
On page 6, where we've got second bullet point from the bottom, devolution had not gone away. And it says, indeed, 10 deals had already been made across the country. It should be noted, and I think it was mentioned on the night, that these were already in motion before the new Prime Minister came in and the Brexit vote. And I think we did make a point of mentioning that, which is quite important, because since then not an awful lot has happened.
My memory does actually concur with yours. I believe that would be generally agreed. So are you suggesting a form of words to be inserted?
10 deals have been completed since the referendum vote in June 2016. No, these are ones that were already in motion.
Councillor Blackmore, can I let Councillor English come in? He may...
It may or may not be correct that members made that point, but I would say that before the bullet points that are being noted, it says, in response to the points made by members, the Chief Executive advised that at no point did the Chief Executive say that. So it would be incorrect to change that minute, because that is not what members said. If you read the introductory line, it's what the Chief Executive said. So it would not be correct.
As usual, Councillor English, you're right. You're right. So that stays as well. Anything else on page 6? Page 7? Councillor Borton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually recall from that evening asking not that my general dissent be recorded, but that my dissents to recommendations 3, 5 and 6 only be recorded, and would be grateful if this could be changed otherwise.
Was that true of everybody who asked for their dissent to be... Well, I need to check, don't I? Yeah. Right, could you say that again slowly for the benefit of Mrs Matthews?
So the revised wording would be Councillors Blackmore, Borton, Bryce and Round ask that their dissent be recorded.
Members, do you agree that amendment? Thank you. Anything else on 7? Page 8, 9, 10, 11, and just a couple of words on 12. Can I sign these as a true record with those amendments? Can I have... Thank you. Agenda item 9. I understand we do not have any petitions tonight. Is that correct, Mrs Matthews?
No, we don't.
Thank you. And agenda item 10, questions and answer session for members of the public, if any. I understand we do not have any questions tonight. Is that correct?
No, we don't.
Thank you. So, members, if we turn to agenda item 11, which is on page 13 in your agenda, that's the committee service work programme. Before I turn to Mr Green, I'd like to inform you for information that no meetings have taken place with Kent leaders or North Kent leaders since the last PNR. So there have been no further discussions on devolution or working with North Kent. Of course, as soon as we've got something, we'll get something on the forward plan. And yesterday, Mr Green and myself met with the Joint Parish Flood Group, and I think Mr Green has a proposal about when we could put something on the future work programme.
Yes, Madam Chair, following from our meeting, we agreed to take a report to the January meeting of this committee to update you on what progress has been made in relation to flood prevention measures. So that's in addition to the work programme at the meeting on 18th of January.
If that's noted, yes, Councillor Firmer?
I just had a question whether timeliness would be of the essence at all. Have we made a judgment that January is okay, or do we need to be meeting any sooner? No.
There are discussions taking place between us, Environment Agency and the Joint Parishes Flood Group, so there won't be anything to report in advance of January.
And when is those discussions ongoing, or is there a particular meeting time or date set for those discussions?
Meetings are being arranged. No specific dates have been set as yet.
Okay, thank you.
So, members, if that's okay with everybody, and it appears to be, if we move. Right. If we move to agenda item 12, which is on page 14, This is a council referral from Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, and we also have representatives from Ottam and Downswood Parish Councils tonight who wish to present a statement regarding this issue. If I can just talk through the way this will proceed this evening. We will have the two statements from the parish councils first. Then we go to Councillor Gooch, Councillor Mortimer and Councillor Lewins to present the referral. So it's slightly different to the way it works in other arenas. After that, we will call the visiting member to the table to speak, and then it is open for debate and discussion, at which point you can question the two officers, Mr. Chapman and Mr. Taylor, regarding... I didn't touch it, and it went off. Regarding the issue at hand, you can also ask questions of the three councillors who have called it in. Now, I want to say very clearly that I did not agree to call this in because of the decision that had been made. I did agree to call it in because, having watched the webcast of the meeting where the decision was made, I'm afraid, in my opinion, it was patently clear that information had not come out at that meeting that may or may not have affected the decision. And some of the questions that councillors asked also were not answered. And so with that in mind, I believe that it was appropriate when the request came for a referral to accept it as a referral. I will say that tonight we need to make a decision based on what we discuss and what we hear tonight. But please, we do want to have a full and fair debate on this topic. So having said that, can I call Councillor Rachel Gray from Ottam Parish Council? If you'd like to come up to the table, please. You have 3 minutes in which to speak. Mrs. Matthews will be timing it, and we won't give you a warning because it tends to disrupt anything somebody wants to say, but we will tell you when the 3 minutes are up.
Oh, am I on? Oh, now I'm on.
It's going on and off. I don't know why.
Do you want me to start again? Okay. The strip of land in question is not surplus to members of the public, not only for dog walking, but also for geocaching. A cache of treasure is hidden in this particular piece of hedgerow, and people enjoy searching in the undergrowth for the cache with their children. This overgrown land is used and must be protected. Before Imperial Park, it simply marked the boundary between the community centre's playing field and Ottam's farmland. But now, this small piece of land has become an important wild area between Senacre and Imperial Park. If this were to be removed, there would be nothing but a wide road between the playing field and the Imperial Park houses. No overgrown green space to separate the communities. In effect, Senacre and Imperial Park would coalesce with nothing but a smaller piece of community centre. Also, any suggestion that the destruction of this piece of land would be offset by a new open space in Bellway's next development, north of Bicknor Wood, misses the point that this is a piece of wild green space. This cannot be replaced by a clinical patch of grass surrounded by new houses. In addition, a decision to sell our public wild green spaces to developers would set a worrying precedent that puts the demands of developers above the needs of our local communities. The residents of Senacre, Ottam and Imperial Park need the opportunity to walk here, to feel close to nature, and with the current plans to build houses on the fields of Ottam, this is more important than ever. If Bellway build on the field north of Bicknor Wood, then Bicknor Wood itself, an ancient woodland, would be surrounded on all sides by housing. The strip of land in question sits directly opposite Bicknor Wood and will provide part of an important western corridor for creatures to access the woodland safely. This must be provided to ensure biodiversity. Without this strip of wild grass and hedgerow, no western access for wildlife, and this will have dire consequences for the health of this woodland. Furthermore, Gore Court Road is currently wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other safely. If Bellway feel the need to widen the road further to facilitate their next project, then let them find another way, not by destroying green spaces or felling protected trees, but by adjusting the design and layout of the houses within Imperial Park itself. They will find a way, they're just looking for the easy option. I urge you to protect our green spaces, and if that inconveniences a developer, then so be it, they will find another way. Finally, the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee have already looked in detail at the proposal and decided this land does have value. They know the land is used by local people, they know the road is already wide enough, and they know that selling publicly owned open spaces to developers sets a worrying precedent. The verdict was simple: this land is not for sale. We find it strange that a committee decision should be questioned by another committee because someone feels it has the right.
Councillor Gray, your 3 minutes are up. And I apologise for the light going on and off. We'd hoped that had been once and for all sorted. Clearly not. Councillor Greenhead from Downswood Parish Council. Likewise, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. I am puzzled that I'm addressing the Policy and Resources Committee tonight. The conclusion I draw from this, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that certain factions in Maidstone Borough Council are putting the interests of developers before the interests of Maidstone tax-paying residents. The whole situation feels underhand to me. The land itself is used by residents of Senacre and Ottham as a recreation ground for dog walkers, joggers and families to exercise and relax. This is not some derelict wasteland that nobody uses, far from it. It is surrounded by an ancient hedgerow, a nature corridor, which will be destroyed if this plan is actioned, a dangerous precedent for Maidstone recreational sites. Clearly, this land is important to Bellway Homes to continue their crazy plans to develop and build houses all the way down Church Road. Downswood Parish Council aren't the only ones to find this choice of site illogical. Helen Whately, our MP, is against it, as is Kent County Council, who have never commented on developments in Kent ever. Dubious first for Maidstone Borough Council and should ring alarm bells for any sane person. These developments would have a detrimental effect on roads in Maidstone going into the town centre. Sutton Road is already at a standstill during rush hour, as is Willington Street. Adding more dwellings along the route will stifle movement of traffic and make the commute in the morning similar to the hell workers face in Dartford in the rush hour. They have trouble recruiting people out of town as they can't bear the 3-hour commute each day. Who can blame them? It's down to bad planning. Gore Court Road leads to Church Road, which is not built for major traffic. The widening of Gore Court Road promotes a cut-through by frustrated drivers trying to get to the M20. Despite what the planning officers suggest, this will happen. Faced with gridlock on Sutton Road, they will try a cut-through. Gore Court and Church Road are it because it is the path of least resistance. This is very dangerous to cyclists and other drivers. God help anyone walking their dog. To sum up, this scheme will harm Maidstone's economy, our air quality and quality of life. Thank you.
I have members who've indicated that they wish to speak, but it's still premature because I am now going to go to Councillor Gooch to explain to us why she wished to refer this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. And thank you for accepting this referral for consideration by this committee. Members, if I may briefly take you through what brought my colleagues and I to this point, and I'll just touch on the actual report itself and then go from there. Earlier this month, Heritage, Culture and Leisure were asked to, to consider whether or not to dispose of a narrow strip of Senacre recreation ground at its eastern boundary. As you can see from the report on page 20 of your... Now, is it page 20 or page 14? No, it's page 20 of your papers. Disposal would enable the minor realignment of Gorecourt Road to facilitate access to the development of land north of Bicknell Wood. Paragraphs 2.1 to 2.5 clearly state that this is a strip of amenity land. It has no strategic value to the council. The existing fence and hedgerow would be replaced with like for like as a condition of the disposal. The disposal would not prevent current activities taking place, neither would it make the open space less attractive to users. Importantly, paragraph 2.6 states that the loss of 0.04 hectares of amenity land from the disposal of the strip will be compensated by the provision of at least 5.8 hectares of open space at the north of Bicknell Wood development, and also that the disposal would, of course, generate a capital receipt. Now, in his presentation to the committee, the Parks and Leisure Manager spoke to the road layout and showed relevant photographs. He mentioned that the area is part of the urban area of Parkwood and that its disposal would facilitate both not just the housing development, but it would also facilitate this open space of 5.8 hectares. In opening up the discussion, the chairman reminded members that their remit that evening was to decide whether or not to declare the strip of land surplus. That's quite clear. A visiting member expressed his concern at the loss of ancient hedgerow, and the planning officer was there, James Bailey, was there to explain that under the hedgerows regulations of 1997, the arboricultural officer did not consider that the hedgerow met the necessary criteria. Also, the onus to replant the hedgerow would naturally transfer to the new owners, and the Parks and Leisure team would still ensure that it would be managed as part of any sale. However, members continued with the concerns about protecting ancient woodland. They challenged the need to widen Gorecourt Road and were worried that the disposal could set a precedent for the sale of publicly owned countryside land for development. Now, in trying to steer members away from all these planning issues and towards the issue of disposal, Mr. Bailey went to some length to explain to members that all these planning facts had been laid out in the report to the 14th of July Planning Committee. The planning officer at the time had mitigated the potential loss of ancient land and protected trees for the widening of Gorecourt Road by negotiating the alternative of taking land from the other side of the road, Seneca Recreation Ground, and planning committee members agreed it. That is fact. There was no further relevant discussion. The chairman concluded the item by saying that members have had the opportunity to ask questions. Development needs infrastructure. The decision now needs to be made as to whether or not to dispose of the land. The recommendation was put to the vote without any summing up of the pros and cons, without any discussion of or presentation of the wider implications of the proposal, and without any further reference to the information contained in the main body of the report. Specifically, I'm referring to paragraph 7, which I think is on page 22 of your papers, which refers to the cross-cutting issues and implications of this issue. Those cross-cutting issues and implications had not been adequately presented to members and, as a consequence, not adequately considered. Yet they were important elements in reaching a decision. Hence the importance of referring this item to this committee for reconsideration. Thank you. And I would now refer to my colleagues, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you very much. I mean, essentially, I watched the CHE meeting for the first time because it was on the new sorry, CHE, because of the new webcast system, sorry. And I was interested in the item because of the planning applications here, and I have good knowledge of the area and the many issues surrounding the local plan. So I sat down with my slippers and cocoa and went to watch away. The more I watched, the more I became concerned about the information and detail being discussed. So I do not think the item received a good committee debate on the actual item in question. Although the meeting was chaired well, there was much emphasis from officers about the previously approved planning application and local plan, but little debate about the actual disposal of the land. So I felt that members were going down the planning route rather than considering the actual recommendation on the papers, which was to consider the land surplus to the council's needs. I also felt that the true item of disposal of the land was not being discussed under a heritage, culture and leisure remit, but more from a planning point of view. And a negative stance was taken regarding the disposal of the land as opposed to any of the major benefits it would have going forward. Obviously, you will make your own conclusions this evening, but the most important point is that Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee did not fully discuss the item, which included any recreational loss, public enjoyment or operational loss to the council, as per the papers that evening, but solely paid attention to the previous planning application. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lewins, do you wish to add anything?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak again, Chair. I echo both Councillor Faguch and Derek Mortimer. This piece of land is just a very small sliver, and it would be prudent to not have any damage to any of the ancient woodland. And I understand that the Hedgerow Act does not apply too much to this. It's not as important as the ancient woodland, which is rich in habitat.
Right.
Thank you.
The problem is you can't actually see whether your lights come on or not, despite the fact you've got the little green button in front of you, and the green one flicks off and you think, OK, we will get round this soon. Councillor Newton, would you like to take the chair as a visiting member, please?
Thank you. I don't agree it was not thoroughly discussed. It had plenty of airtime, and I think if anybody had been seriously interested in it, they should have come along to that meeting. This piece of land, James Bailey was given plenty of time, and if you watch the website, you will see that. He was given reasons for it, and as members here were given the options they had. And I will just go back on this. 2 Conservatives voted that it was not to be used, 1 UKIP and 1 Lib Dem. There were 2 members that were Lib Dems that didn't, and there was 1 abstention. So this committee was well discussed. Just because it doesn't come out with the answer that people want, then that is why I see we're here. It was considered very lengthy and rejected. The thin piece of hazel hedgerow was where a car went through it and was pulled back out of it. It wasn't. It's ancient hedgerow that's been there over 250 years. It is a wildlife corridor to the other piece of the ancient woodland, which is at the far end of the recreation ground. Now, I think that's very important because this land is used for recreation by people of Ottham and Seneca. It's 414 square metres. It isn't just a thin sliver. And replacing the removal of the hedgerows, it will take some considerable time for a hazel tree line that will provide a wildlife corridor for it to be re-established. This area also is used by dormice. It is one of the areas where there are dormice in this county. And to rip this out unnecessarily is a crime. It is a crime, basically, because it's damaging the wildlife. And I personally sat in on the pre-application meetings that were with Bellway, and I asked, are you likely to be able to deal with this site without intruding further into the woodland, into the open area? No problem. We have it on our. We have a sufficient ground. Now suddenly, they don't have. Now where this is, where they're proposing it, there is sufficient room for 2 cars to pass. And it is interesting that KCC weren't invited to comment. Why weren't they invited to comment? They are the people that manage the highways in this county. And, I have an email, actually, from them that I have a copy of that says they weren't invited to. They didn't know about this. Now, I find that very strange. Things are going on here that I think are somewhat underhanded.
Councillor Newton, I made it quite clear that this was called in on that it was agreed on one ground and one ground only. Now, we can disagree on whether I think one way and you think another, but I am not having it said that something is going on, because it isn't.
Thank you. I'm particularly not happy with the way it's been handled, and particularly the grubbing out of ancient hedgerows, which will breach the wildlife corridor there, and it will damage the corridor. In conclusion, may I recommend that P&R uphold the vote at Heritage, Culture and Leisure and refuse to declare that the Seneca open space and its recreation ground is not surplus to requirement. It was a constitutional decision made with a majority by the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Right, Councillor Harper, I had you first.
Obviously, this is, quite an emotive issue, but one of the things looking at the report, in paragraph 2.6 on page 21, it says that there's going to be 5.8 hectares of other alternative open space. But we don't. I mean, it would help us to come to some view on this if we actually had a map or something tonight showing us what the alternatives were, because I can't see that in the papers we've got before us. Okay.
Councillor Harper, we've got something come up. Would you like an officer? It's a question to you. Would you like an officer to talk us through that particular
I think yes. I think we'd all benefit from understanding the alternative provision.
All right, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. The drawing you have in front of you, members, is the revised proposal for land north of Bicknor Wood. The 5.8 hectares of open space is shown on the right-hand side, the east side of the screen, with a 40 to 80 metre wooded buffer. We also have a 15 metre buffer to the south where the site adjoins Bicknor Wood. We've also negotiated a 15 metre buffer to the west on Gore Court Road. That wasn't part of the original application. That's an additional element of open space. There is also a retention of a hedgerow and buffer on the northern side of the site as well. So all 4 sides of differing depth. The open space also includes the centre of this proposal, although it's an outline planning application, so the details of exactly that arrangement will be determined at a later point. But the proposal does include the quantum of 5.8 hectares of open space, which will be publicly accessible.
The Harper.
Excuse me, thank you for that. I think the issue obviously is about the quality of the land being exchanged, isn't it? So on the one side we've got this existing small piece of land at Senacre which has got this wildlife and ecological benefits we've had pointed out, compared to taking on a new piece of land, presumably, which at the moment has very little benefit. And then it's going to be a question of how quickly can you plant a new fence or new hedgerow in the reduced area of Senacre to make up for the swapping of the land. Or am I missing something? Is that effectively what the issue comes down to?
Was there actually a question in there?
I mean, I'm trying to understand, because at the moment, as a general line, I'm against any disposal of any public open space. I think, you know, we need to hold on to all of the open space controlled by the council or public authorities. However, there can be circumstances, and this might be one, where the benefit outweighs the potential loss of a small area. And I'm trying to understand a bit more from the officers as we're being asked to make a decision on this tonight.
Mr. Chapman, do you wish to come back there?
I'll be brief. There's 2 points. One is that, as I think has been already mentioned, should the land be disposed of, there is a requirement for a replacement hedgerow to be provided and a replacement fence. I'm sure that could be arranged to be provided in advance of the removal of the existing hedge to allow the continuity in terms of wildlife and ecology. I think the other point worth mentioning, if one's looking at the balance of loss as opposed to the benefit, is that the alternative and original proposal involved a widening of Gore Court Road on the east, which affected an ancient woodland and some trees covered by preservation orders, and under the National Planning Policy Framework guidance, we are seeking to protect that ancient woodland and therefore suggested it would be better to widen the road on the other side, thus securing the future of the ancient woodland, which is particularly protected.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Borton, you're next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I don't live a million miles away from this site and travel up and down it down Gore Court Road most days. And I think we've got to have an acceptance here of where we are and that these schemes have been, rightly or wrongly, given planning permission by the Planning Committee. And it's now about not whether there should or shouldn't be development up there, because some people, me included, had a few reservations about the amount of development going on up Sutton Road. But it's how best we make it work, because we cannot reverse a decision of the Planning Committee previously. I wasn't at the Heritage Culture Leisure meeting. I've not seen the webcast. I'm judging what I read in front of me and what I hear tonight. And to me, it's quite clear, and Councillor Harper is right, it's what are we replacing this with? And I'm satisfied with what I just heard from the officer there on some of the recommendations that he proposed. We also need to look at Gore Court Road. It is a very narrow road. It is not, it's not easy to pass for two cars to pass at certain points. This included. It's a very, very narrow bend in the there. That's a very, very narrow bend. It's incredibly dangerous. I've driven up and down it many times in the dark and nearly crashed many, many times. You look at Senacre Recreation Ground as well. It's a big area. It's got a full-size football pitch on, which has not been used. Certainly, I've not refereed there for a long time. And it's not. We are not lacking space as you are in other recreation grounds around the borough. So, to me, I'm afraid this is a bit of a no-brainer here. We've got to make work what we've been given with, and I'm quite happy with the assurances that we received from the officer, and believe that the councillors were right to call this in.
Thank you, Councillor Borton. Councillor English.
Yes, just one thing. I don't think this can set the precedent in terms of disposal of pieces of recreational land in relation to planning developments, because as residents of Tovel and Southwall will remember, that precedent was set very much by the disposal of the land at the entrance to Hale Park. And like with Hale Park, it is very much a question of trying to achieve the best result that can be achieved for the public and the council, and not rehashing the arguments on either side of the planning decision. I welcome what the officer has said about getting the hedgerow in place before the removal of the existing hedgerow. I think that it would be helpful. But I think the other important aspect of this is what type of open space goes on the 5.8 hectares we are actually talking about. As I think the first parish council speaker sort of indicated, there is all the difference in the world between providing semi-natural or natural landscape of an ecological value, and we can certainly see that most of the existing land there is a field of limited ecological value. But I would like to put it on record now, and I would hope planning officers take serious note of this, and I actually hope this committee takes note of it, that we should actually be looking to offset the ecological damage from the removal of the existing hedgerow and wildlife corridor by seeking substantial ecological benefits and gains from the 58,000 square metres as opposed to 414 square metres that would be gained. So I really do think there is an important point to be made about ensuring that the quality of the new land gained is of the highest, and what we're not talking about ploughed fields and sterilised bits of grass which are chemically nuked into oblivion at regular intervals, because we all know that that can happen with certain types of management arrangements, with new developments. We've got to ensure that we are not getting sterilised pieces of land which have nothing living on them, and we are actually getting the benefit. So if the officers can assure me that we can do that, because that is an outline application, and we still have the ability to shape events going forward. If you can assure me that we can do that, then I might be minded to support it. If you can tell me that cannot be done, then I think that we're going to have to say that this land is not surplus to requirements.
Mr. Chapman.
Through the Chair. In terms of Councillor English's point, I would point out that it is an outline planning permission that committee resolved to grant, and the landscaping and associated deals arrangements were reserved for future discussion and future decision. I believe that the outline proposal included the vast majority of open space as natural and semi-natural open space rather than a more sterile arrangement, but those are illustrative plans. So I would reassure Councillor English that the desire to retain this as the highest quality, or turn this in fact into highest quality open space, is one we will be seeking to do as part of the scheme as it goes forward.
I would hope the members of this committee would be open to recording that in our decision, that we wish to see that happen.
Well, we don't know what the decision is yet, but is the committee in general agreement that we should, if the decision is to dispose, that we should attempt to lock down what will happen, so that what we have
Can I move a motion to the meeting, which might help on that?
You don't need to move the motion, but we need to have a general view. But we must. I know we mustn't stray into the planning application. That's the issue. That's one of the problems here. But I do think there's a genuine concern on the part of councillors in making this decision. They want to have some surety that the quality of the replacement land, as it is mentioned in the papers as a reason for disposal, should be that which the majority of councillors wish to see. Do you want to come in, Donna, or are you?
What I was going to propose was that the recommendation is to proceed with the disposal of the land as was the original one, but then add in two additional recommendations, because we're told we can substitute a different decision, and those would be sort of a little one. So it's subject to, one, the new hedgerow being planted and established in advance of the old hedgerow being taken out, because that would hopefully safeguard and mitigate the ecological damage to Senacre. And then a second one, a little two, as now, and I don't know if we can actually do this one, but a development agreement be sought to ensure that the new 5.4 hectares are managed in an ecologically biodiverse basis.
Councillor Harper, I have your first one. I think Mrs Matthews would appreciate it if you could say the little two in a much slower way, and then we need to talk to legal.
Okay, so the second one, little two, was a development agreement should be sought to ensure the new 5.4 hectares of open space are managed in a ecologically biodiverse basis. Okay.
Right, I'm going to Ms Price before I ask for a seconder, because I think we need to hear what she has to say.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just make it clear that the decision you're being asked to look at this evening is whether or not to declare the land surplus? You're not looking at whether or not you're going to dispose of the land. And this will be going out for consultation, sorry, not consultation, a notice will be advertised, and it will be then that the decision is made on whether or not to dispose. And it is that stage that you can make these recommendations, not at this one.
Councillor English.
I'm sorry, I agreed with everything except what was just said there. I don't think we can actually even declare it, in the view of this committee, surplus without accepting Paul's second recommendation. I know we're not moving to disposal, but I'm not prepared to declare this land operationally surplus without the recommendation too. It is a decision, it's within this council's power to take that into account when we declare this land operationally surplus or not. I take the point it's not the disposal decision, and any consultation on the disposal could change that recommendation. It is not the final recommendation, but I do not believe for a moment that we cannot make that recommendation at this point, that decision at this point on the surplus issue.
So are you prepared to second Councillor Harper's words at
Subject
this point?
to the clarification from legal that it was about declaring the land operationally surplus, not disposing at this point.
So just for clarification to everybody, the decision to, well, it's two things tonight. The first is to declare or not the land surplus to requirement. If the decision is to say it's surplus to requirement, it's then to agree that it goes out under the legal system. I don't know what it's written in your papers, that it goes to consultation. They are the two decisions we are making. I do think from the chair that we do have a bit of a dilemma here, because there is a clear view that in order to make the decision that it's surplus to requirements, councillors want some surety about how the I said councillors, I didn't say all councillors, want some, and I've got other people to speak, want some surety that the biodiverse aspect of it will be incorporated at a later date. Please, Ms Price, will you come back with your advice?
I understand the concerns that you're raising, but the decision to dispose will come back to this committee. And I have concerns that you would put, you know, tonight you are deciding, is it surplus or isn't it surplus? And how you may decide after consultation not to dispose of at all. So it is at that stage where you should be putting the recommendations and the caveats at that stage.
No, well, very briefly, because no, hang on a minute. Briefly,
I will have
I
to
think
say,
you've been
I
given a
cannot
very clear
understand.
directive.
I cannot understand why you are saying this, Ms Price, because it is quite clear that some members of this council are not prepared to declare this land operationally surplus without the balancing factor. The report that went to HCL majors on the balancing factor. If we are not allowed to take into account the balancing factor in the decision to declare this land operationally surplus, I will have no choice but to vote against the recommendation to declare it operationally surplus, because we will not have taken into account the major elements in the very report that we were supposed to be discussing.
Right, Councillor English, I think you've had your say, and we have got other people to speak. It's Councillor, and we can all make up our own minds, can't we? Councillor Garland.
It's quite clear the decision tonight is to make, or to consider whether the land is surplus. It is a very small strip of land. The reference for Parks and Leisure team is quite clear. It has no strategic value to the council. The planning committee, which we should not go into any great detail because that decision has been made it quite clear that was acceptable to them. I therefore move the recommendations on the paper that we declare the land surplus and we go out to placing of a public notice pursuant to Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972. I think there is plenty of land in that area. It is 10-acre recreation ground. The small sliver of land which we're talking about cannot possibly conceivably be of any strategic value to this council. However, what releasing that particular land does is improve a site of housing. And it does strike me that some of those who were arguing at HCL regarding this particular land were fighting some small rearguard action about the inevitable acceptance of housing that's likely to come through on a local plan. So I think we need to take a more pragmatic view than what has been said around this committee from certain individuals, that the land should be declared surplus and that we move to option 2. I therefore move the recommendations as per the paper.
I will ask if that's seconded. All right, Councillor Borton was first. I do want to make something clear. I do not believe that any of the 3 people who have called it in are fighting a rearguard action against development. But I think we'll keep to the point. I'm going to go through the speakers, and then I've got a question of my own that I would like to ask. Councillor Blackmore, you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just say, Mr Chapman, thank you very much for the photographs, because it does make a lot of difference. If you've not been able to drive past the site, it helps to be able to have the photos. And also the outline of this particular site, because it's my recollection, if you go back to the original local plan document, it states very clearly the buffers that will be around the site, so that's the 100 metres, etc., that you've referred to. And I think that's really important, so that we can actually put into context, because I think context is very important with this strip of land, the 414 square metres, as opposed to the 5.8 hectares and the wide buffering. I think we are in danger of over-egging the pudding massively. We are looking at a strip of land, considering whether that is surplus. That is all we are here to do this evening. We're not deciding on how many animals we're saving, because nobody wants to see anything detrimental happen to the site. But I think we have to look at the decision that we are being called to make, and it is just to say, is this surplus to requirements? That doesn't mean to say we're disposing of it. That's a completely separate decision. So if we are only looking at is this surplus or not, then I'm very happy to support that particular decision at this point in time. Everything else can be decided by the planning committee or decided later. That is the only thing we should be looking at. Is it surplus or not?
Councillor Cox.
Can I make this very quickly? Thank you very much. That was exactly what I was going to really bring and say. That's all I ever thought that Heritage, Culture and Leisure were trying to do as well. I think it was complicated. I'm not going to say any more because I'm sure we will have to at a later date speak about this. But just one point of clarification. Could Mr Chapman tell us whether there is a path proposed along the road that's going to come down past this slither of land? So is a road and a path on one side, or is it just a road?
Yes, a footway of appropriate width is shown on this drawing and forms part of the application.
Councillor Firmer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm a bit concerned I might be a couple of, maybe 10 minutes behind on the debate, because I think people that have spoken have provided a lot of clarity that I was perhaps seeking a few minutes ago. But if you wouldn't mind, I do have a couple of questions which I would like to be addressed before I can really fully make my decision. I must say, on reading it for the first time, it did look a bit light on detail as a proposal. However, and I suppose that's kind of brought to me two sticky points, which I'd just like a bit more clarification on. So if Mr Chapman can, a bit more clarification on the 2.2, is it really an either or on ancient woodland versus this disposal of land, or sorry, surplus to requirements land? Just because do we have that power to kind of make that decision? And it's probably just my inexperience. And the other point is relating to the kind of community use of the land, which I don't think we've really talked about enough at this meeting so far. It strikes me that I like the idea that the 5.8 is a lot of land and what we're discussing is a very small slither, so I kind of understand where people are going with that. But what I question is the previous community use of that kind of bigger piece of land, the kind of, what was it, the recreation ground, that in 2013 was used for football pitches. Do we know and have we made a judgment on whether if we remove this slither and add in the hedgerow kind of moving back, would there be a possibility for football pitches to be football games to be used on the land in future? I only ask just because of the rise in obesity, and I think it's important that a community can have that available use of land. And the other thing was, in the past, the local churches have used it for the fair. Now, just from my understanding, the fair could probably still take place without that slither of land, but did we know how recently that had been used? Thank you.
Might be more appropriate for Mr Taylor. Who wants to...
Shall I answer the first couple of points and then perhaps the Parks and Leisure Manager can chip in? In effect, the point about the strip of land in question or the ancient woodlands, it is a straightforward either-or. Without going into great detail in terms of planning, the submitted local plan policy which allocates the relevant housing site for housing includes the requirement for the widening of Gore Court Road connecting with the site to the south. So it recognises the need to widen the road. You either widen it on one side or the other. Officers felt this was the least worst option and negotiated to do that. The point about the football pitch is, my understanding is more than enough land will be left for an adequate football pitch. But perhaps Mr Taylor would be able to come in on the fair point.
Yes, just on the football pitch as well, where the previous football pitch was when it was in use, it can still be set up again whenever we want to. We just haven't got anyone wishing to use it at the moment. It wouldn't be affected at all by this piece of land going, so it would be in exactly the same location. Regarding the fair, yes, that will carry on. It's such a small slither of land. Just to put it into context, it's 414 square metres, which is about 1.5 tennis courts. And the 5.8 hectares is just 58,000 metres, which is about 11.5 football pitches, full-size football pitches. So just to give you an idea, to try and put it into context.
Thank you. I don't think I needed the help with the maths, but thank you very much. Yes, I think that's fine, but thank you for answering my questions. I think I've quite reassured by both your answers.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Councillor English's point, I just had a question regarding the consultation or the notice to Ms Price. So when the notice goes out, if there were concerns regarding the need to make sure that the offset was in place before this could come back for a final decision, would that be something that would come out through the consultation and then would be appended to that decision, if you like, when it comes back?
The decision will actually be made by Policy and Resources Committee. So my understanding is, I've not ever been involved in one of these, but the responses will form part of the report back to Policy and Resources, and then you will make your decision then.
So if councillors are concerned tonight that they really need to see that taken into account, what I'm hearing is if that was strongly represented through that consultation period, that could then be taken into account when it comes back to this committee.
Yes.
Right, because I have a shaking head, I want an absolutely unqualified answer. When, and you did say yes, but let's hear it so it's really well recorded. My understanding is that we are being asked to declare this surplus to requirements, and so we could at this point, and indeed it's in the papers, so Councillor Garland, I'm going to ask you if you're prepared to add this into your recommendation. We can at this point say, if we decide to declare it surplus to requirements, that it is on the condition that the hedge is replaced, because that is pertinent to the bit of land we are being asked, and it was in the papers. Let's take that bit first.
You can't say it's on the condition of, you can recommend to the decision makers when the disposal comes, and the disposal can be on the condition of. You can't make it the surplus on the condition.
Because I think there are two separate aspects to this. The first is what happens to the recreation ground as it is. That's quite a salient point, I think. And it is in the papers that Heritage, Culture and Leisure were asked to look at. It actually is in these papers that the hedge would be replaced like for like, and the fence. So that needs to be, it's there and agreed, yes?
Sorry, Madam Chair. I think the decision we're being asked to make tonight has been made quite clear. I think to add anything to it detracts from that key decision. And I'm perfectly willing to accept it as maybe as an informative, but I think you're on very rocky ground if you try to make it a condition of the decision that we are making this evening. And you've been given very clear legal advice on that. I think as Chairman, if I may, you should accept that.
I think maybe I'm expressing myself badly, because I think why I'm a little bit confused is being told that that can't be part of it when the original decision was made in the paper. So if you're agreeing the original recommendation made by Heritage, Culture and Leisure, that was made on the basis that the hedge would be replaced. And it is in the original papers. Hang on a minute, let me finish. This is what I'm trying to tease out, because I can quite understand that we shouldn't stray into the planning application. I can see that, and that can be discussed later. I know Councillor English will disagree with me, but nevertheless, I'm concerned that the original Heritage, Culture and Leisure decision was made on the basis of what was in the papers, which actually did talk about the replacement of the hedge. So we need to know that if we are agreeing with you tonight, that it is on the basis of the original papers, which mentioned that hedge. So please, Ms. Price, if you could just clarify.
Obviously, what was in the papers was information about what would happen when you get to disposal stage, just to give some background and so that you have a full decision. But the decision that Heritage and Culture and Leisure were asked to make is the same decision as you're being asked to make this evening. And the replacement of the hedge is relevant. If you make a decision to dispose, you're not making a decision to dispose this evening. So I think that information is put into the report to give you some background and put it into context of what will happen going forward. But actually, you know, it would be even more of a sparse report if it was just about declaring it surplus.
Right, so have we got the clarity for everybody? We are declaring maybe surplus to requirements, and everything else we are assured will be discussed at a later date if after the consultation it comes back. Right. No, just a moment, Councillor English. I want to come to Councillor Harvey next.
It's all right, my question's been answered.
All right, in that case, Councillor English, I'll allow you to come.
The reason I'm so concerned, Madam Chairman, is because this happened before. We were assured when the Hale Park discussion took place that the issues that were raised in the land disposal would be, the decision to declare surplus would be picked up, and when we came back the second time, they weren't. So that regardless of how it's done, there needs to be some process that ensures this happens, because it flipping well didn't the last time we had this situation in the council. And all those assurances, I know there are different people involved, but all those assurances went for nothing.
Yes, you can, but in this instance, because I was involved with the previous Hale Place, I do know that what Councillor English is saying is true. So we have to be absolutely certain that we can cover them next time round.
When it comes back, and it will come back to here to make that decision, you will be able to put into your... If you make the decision to dispose, you can put in any conditions at that stage that you wish to make for that disposal.
Look, when it comes back, and depending on what the result of the consultation was, potentially I could put forward those 2 amendments I suggested tonight as caveats to the ultimate disposal. And at that point, if I were to do that, they would not be ruled out of order, because I think that's quite important to my view tonight.
It will be for the committee, yourselves, on the evening to decide whether or not you wish to make those recommendations. Mr.
Right.
Chapman would like to come in.
Mrs. Matthews, have we got that firmly recorded? All right. We are being asked to make the decision tonight whether this is surplus to requirements. Sorry. Okay, Mr. Chapman.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the point that's just been made. While committee can put whatever restrictions they want, should they eventually dispose, I would point out that the details of the use of the open space as proposed would be subject to the planning process separately. And while nature conservation would be part of that decision-making process, we'd also be looking to provide amenity space and play areas as part of a balanced range of open spaces. So while I obviously recognise the concerns being expressed, I wouldn't want the eventual decision to fetter the process of coming up with a decent scheme in planning terms.
But the issue of the hedge replacement is not predicated on the planning application. The hedge is part of the actual agreement to dispose, as written in the papers. I hope everybody is clear, because Councillor Bryce, you did wish to come back, and then I'm definitely putting a line.
I remember sitting on Planning Committee the night this was discussed, and would it be appropriate to make sure that this, I know that you're here, Mr Chapman, but as we're saying, this application will come back, and the relevant conditions could be ensured that they are discussed when that application comes back, and maybe a memo of this discussion should be shared with the developer, just so that we have some written form of notification of the discussion that this committee had, that it's passed to the developer, that it's held on file against this planning application, so that if another officer is allocated to the application when it comes back as full, all of this discussion is captured and it can be made sure it's taken through to the appropriate committee.
I can make sure that the developers are certainly aware of the detail of our discussion this evening and the concerns that members are expressing.
Members, then I will remind you. Actually, I should say, Councillor Gooch, did you wish to wrap up at all?
It's still not going. I would love to move the recommendation on the papers. I thank members for their consideration. This land needs to be disposed. Let's go for the recommendation. Seconded.
Councillor Blackmore.
But before we do, I think if you look at page 14, you've got 1A and B. Now, to me, that's not clear. I think it should say substitute a different decision in place of the decision of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, so that it is absolutely crystal clear which committee we are referring to. If I may add in those 3 words, 4 words even.
Councillor Blackmore, I agree on both of those, A or B, whichever one is chosen. Right, just to clarify, I do believe that this has been well and truly thrashed out tonight. I did not believe it had been the first time round, and I believe that is where Councillor Gooch is coming from. So you have the recommendation on page 14. You are asked to decide whether it should be for disposal. In other words, to declare it surplus to requirements. Yes, to declare it surplus to requirements. So that means that you are asked to endorse, the first option is to endorse the original Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee. No, sorry. Oh, God, I'm getting... I'm sorry. I need a stiff drink, I think. It seems to me that the committee... Well, no, actually, I should do it this way. The first one is to endorse the original Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee decision. Those in agreement with that, please show. So that clearly is not agreed. So then you go to this committee wishes to substitute a different decision in place of the decision of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, which is to approve the original officer recommendation to declare that it is surplus to requirements. Those in favour of that? Okay.
Can we say, as per the language on page 19, so we're actually specific as to what we are agreeing to, please?
Yes. Mrs. Matthews, do you want to say what you've actually got? So we're all... Right, I'll read it out then. The committee agrees to substitute a different decision in place of the decision of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, which is to agree the officer recommendation as per, no, we'll have the wording, which is 1, to declare surplus the open space strip of land with a total area of 414 square metres to the west of Gore Court Road, outlined in red on the attached plan Appendix A, and 2, to authorise the placing of a public notice pursuant of Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972. Is that agreed, Councillor Blackmore? Does that... Yes?
That ticks all the boxes. Thank you.
Okay. Those in favour, please indicate. Those opposed, please indicate. 1. Those abstaining? 2. Thank you. That has been a very long debate. Does anybody want to have a 5-minute break? Yes, all right. Let's say 10 minutes, back at 8 o'clock. I lost my completely at the end. No, that's what we got there. I know where Clive's coming from because I was involved in Hales Race. We raised it, we were told it was not the right time to do it, we could do it at the next one, and when we got to the next one we were told we couldn't. And that land was then discussed and had been bought by the borough, saying that it was to protect the land behind against development, and then the borough sold it to enable development. So that is why some of us have real anxieties. But this is now recorded.
Yes, and this will come back quite quickly, probably to the December meeting, so it will be fresh in people's minds. So,
okay, so I want to say well done.
Yes.